It was a quiet evening in the small coastal town of Bay Ridge, the kind of night where the streets felt empty and the ocean breeze carried a mix of salt and calm. Streetlights flickered along the sidewalks, and the sound of waves could be heard faintly from a distance. In that calm setting, a young man walked steadily, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his mind racing with thoughts far beyond what anyone could imagine. His name was Caleb. To most people, he was just another face in the crowd, polite, quiet, and always careful to avoid trouble. He lived alone in a small apartment not far from the harbor, working long hours in a tech company that specialized in cybersecurity. But what no one knew, not even his closest friends, was that Caleb had been working undercover with the FBI for the past several months. He wasn't an agent in the traditional sense. He wasn't carrying a gun or wearing a badge. He was the kind of person the Bureau relied on for intelligence, someone who understood computers better than most people understood themselves. That night he had one job: deliver a small encrypted drive to an agent waiting at a late-night cafe downtown. The drive contained vital data that could help prevent a massive cyber attack on government systems scheduled to happen within hours. As he walked through the dimly lit streets, Caleb checked his watch. It was already 10:45 p.m. The meeting was set for 11. He didn't want to be late, not for something this important. The next morning began with rain. The gray sky hung low, and water streaked down the windows of the Bureau's safe house. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Turner stood near the table, phone in hand, while Caleb reviewed the latest data on his laptop. The trace from the previous night had worked. They had a lead, faint but real. The signal that had activated, the self-destruct sequence in the warehouse computers, had bounced through multiple locations, but the last ping came from a place only a few miles outside D.C. Turner spoke first. "It's an old communications hub, decommissioned years ago. Nobody's supposed to be using it anymore." Caleb looked up. "Which makes it the perfect place to hide." Turner nodded. "We move in today, but this time we do it quietly. No backup until we confirm." Caleb could see the exhaustion in Turner's eyes. None of them had slept much. The entire situation had turned into something larger than either of them expected. What began as an arrest gone wrong had exposed corruption, betrayal, and now a rogue intelligence network operating under their noses. As they prepared to leave, Caleb packed his gear with practiced efficiency. He double-checked his files, making sure every byte of data they'd recovered was secure. Then, as he zipped the bag, he paused. "Turner," he said slowly. "What? If this goes deeper than we think? What if the person we're chasing isn't just a hacker, but someone inside the system who wants this all buried?" Turner sighed quietly. "I've thought about that too. But we can't start doubting everyone. We follow the evidence, that's all we've got." Caleb nodded. He knew Turner was right, but something still felt off, a small detail he couldn't quite see yet. By the time they reached the communications hub, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The building stood alone at the end of a narrow road, its concrete walls streaked with age. The tall metal tower beside it leaned slightly, antennas long dead but still reaching toward the sky. The next morning began in silence. The city outside was still waking up, but inside the safe house, Caleb sat by the window, unable to sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving small puddles on the ground that reflected the pale morning light. He hadn't moved for hours. The message from the night before was still burned into his mind. "He's not who you think he is." He turned the words over and over in his head, trying to make sense of them. Turner had been his only ally, the one person who had defended him when everyone else doubted him. Could it all have been a lie? When the door opened quietly, Caleb turned. Turner walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee again, like nothing had changed. "Didn't sleep, huh?" Turner asked. Caleb forced a small nod. "Not much." Turner set the coffee on the table and sat down across from him. For a moment neither spoke. The quiet was heavy, filled with thoughts neither wanted to say aloud. Finally, Caleb asked, "Did you find anything about that message I told you about? The one sent from your account?" Turner's expression didn't change. "Not yet. Whoever's behind this knows how to erase footprints, but I've got a tech team looking into it quietly. Caleb frowned. A tech team? You said we shouldn't tell anyone. Turner smiled slightly. You think I'd risk it? No. I'm using one guy I've trusted for years off the record. Something about his calm tone made Caleb uneasy. Turner was always composed, but now it felt different. Rehearsed. Controlled. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. They both sat in silence again. The sound of the rainwater dripping from the roof filled the pauses between them. After a few minutes, Turner leaned forward. You know, I've been thinking. That message you got last night, maybe it's meant to divide us. Maybe they know. We're close to something and they want us turning on each other. Caleb looked at him carefully. Maybe. But deep down, he wasn't convinced. Later that day, Turner received a call from headquarters. They want us back in, he said as he hung up. The director's calling an emergency briefing. Caleb followed him without a word. When they arrived, the bureau building was unusually quiet. Security was tighter and a few familiar faces were missing. In the conference room, the director stood at the front, flanked by two senior agents. We've had another breach, the director said as they entered. The rogue network hit one of our servers last night. We think they were after classified field agent lists. Caleb's stomach turned. That was no small thing. If those names were stolen, every agent in the field could be compromised. Do we know who did it? Turner asked. The director shook his head. Not yet, but whoever it is, they had internal access. That means one of our own. The words sent a chill through the room. Turner's jaw tightened. Caleb stayed silent. After the meeting, Turner motioned for Caleb to follow him to his office. Inside, Turner closed the door behind them. They're closing in, he said quietly. If we don't find the mole before they do, they'll blame us both. Caleb nodded slowly. So what's our move? Turner handed him a small folder. Inside were surveillance photos, printed reports, and access logs. This, Turner said, is everything I've found about who might be behind the leaks. There's one name that keeps showing up. An analyst in the data division. We'll check his records tonight, off the grid. Caleb looked through the files. Everything seemed legitimate. The access logs, the timestamps, the file transfers. But something about it didn't sit right. The timing of it all was too perfect, almost like the evidence had been placed there for them to find. Still, he followed Turner's lead. That night, they drove across the city to the data center. It was quiet, only a few lights on inside. Turner used his credentials to unlock the door, and they entered the main archive room filled with rows of humming servers. Caleb went straight to the workstation Turner pointed out. He accessed the analyst's account, checking the recent activity logs. At first glance, it matched what Turner had shown him, multiple unauthorized file transfers. But as Caleb dug deeper, something didn't add up. The transfers weren't external. They were looped internally, routed through a mirrored account, one created under Turner's ID. His heart dropped. Turner, he said quietly, you need to see this. Turner stepped closer, but his voice stayed calm. What is it? Caleb turned the screen toward him. These logs, the analyst didn't send the data. You did. Or at least your credentials did. Again. Turner stared at the screen, then sighed softly. I was hoping you wouldn't find that so soon. Caleb froze. What do you mean? Turner stepped back slightly, hands raised in a slow, almost tired gesture. I needed you to trust me long enough to finish the job. Caleb stood up, heart pounding. You're the mole? Turner shook his head. No, not in the way you think. I didn't start this. I was part of an internal task group years ago, off record, that handled unauthorized intelligence ops. But it went bad. People in power started using it for their own interests. When I tried to walk away, they buried me. Now I'm the only one left cleaning up the mess. Caleb didn't know whether to believe him. So you've been lying to me since day one? Turner's eyes softened. I've been protecting you. You stumbled into something you were never supposed to see. The only reason you're still alive is because I kept your name off their list. The words hit hard. Caleb didn't move. Turner took a step closer. Listen to me. The files on this server, they're proof of who's been controlling the rogue network. You want to know who the real traitor is? It's not me. It's the director. Caleb's breath caught. The director? Turner nodded. He's been feeding classified intel to private contractors for years. I have the evidence right here, but I needed you to help me access this server, because my clearance alone wasn't enough anymore. Caleb stared at him, his mind spinning. If Turner was telling the truth, everything they knew was backward. But if he was lying, then this was a setup. Turner saw the hesitation in his eyes. You can walk away if you want, he said quietly. But if you do, they'll pin everything on you. I'm the only one who can prove your innocence. Caleb hesitated. Then, against his better judgment, he said, "Show me the evidence." Turner nodded and inserted a small drive into the termi. No. Lines of encrypted code flashed on the screen. Slowly, an archive opened, a collection of files, emails, and payment records. Caleb scanned through them, eyes widening. The transactions led directly to accounts linked to the Bureau's leadership. Turner wasn't lying. But before they could move the files, the lights suddenly flickered. Then the alarm went off. Red lights flashed across the room. Turner cursed. They found us. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed. Caleb's pulse raced. What do we do? Take the drive, Turner said, pulling it from the terminal. Get out through the east exit. I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you, Caleb said. Turner gave him a small, tired smile. You have to. You're the only one who can finish this now. Before Caleb could protest, Turner pushed him toward the side door. Go! Caleb ran, the drive clutched tightly in his hand. Behind him, he heard voices shouting, boots pounding against the floor, and then silence. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. He started the engine and sped off into the night, heart hammering in his chest. Hours later, he stopped at an old storage facility outside the city. There, in the dim light of a flickering bulb, he plugged the drive into his laptop. The files were all there, the evidence Turner had promised. He sat back, breathing hard. Turner had been telling the truth after all, but the victory felt hollow. He didn't know what had happened to Turner, or if he was even alive. The next morning, the news broke. The Bureau announced that Turner had been killed in an internal confrontation after being exposed as a double agent. His name was splashed across headlines, a traitor, a criminal, a liar. Caleb stared at the screen in disbelief. They had erased him just like that. He knew what he had to do. Using Turner's data, he sent everything anonymously to the press, the documents, the emails, the payment trails. Within hours, the story spread. Investigations were launched. Several high-ranking officials resigned. Justice, at least, had begun. A week later, Caleb visited Turner's grave. It was quiet there, a small stone under a gray sky. He stood for a long time thinking about the man he had trusted, doubted, and finally understood. Maybe you weren't perfect, Caleb said softly, but you did the right thing in the end. He turned to leave, the wind moving gently through the trees. The world around him felt a little lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because one person's truth had finally come to light, and as he walked away, he realized something. Even in a world full of lies, sometimes one small act of courage could still change everything. Turner parked the car a short distance away. We'll go in from the side entrance. It's less exposed. They moved quickly but cautiously. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a dim corridor lined with peeling paint and dusty floors. It smelled of damp metal and neglect. Inside, they found a series of rooms filled with old equipment, monitors, cables, and terminals that hadn't been used in years. But among the decay, Caleb noticed something that didn't fit. A small coffee cup sitting on a desk. Still warm, he gave Turner a look. Someone's here. Turner drew his weapon quietly and motioned for Caleb to stay close. They followed the sound of faint typing that echoed from down the hall. As they approached, Caleb peered around the corner and froze. There, sitting at a terminal, was a man in a dark hoodie typing quickly. The light from the screen reflected on his face. Calm, focused, unaware he was being watched. Turner signaled with his hand. On my mark. They stepped into the room and Turner spoke firmly. Federal agents. Don't move. The man stopped typing but didn't turn around. You took longer than I expected, he said, voice low. Turner frowned. Hands where I can see them. Slowly the man raised his hand, still facing the screen. You shouldn't have come alone, he said softly. Before Turner could respond, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Caleb spun around just as two shadows moved through the dark. Ambush, he shouted. Everything happened fast. Turner ducked behind a console, exchanging brief shouts with the attackers. Caleb dove for cover, reaching for his flashlight. The narrow beams of light cut through the darkness, flashing across faces, 1, 2, 3 figures closing in. The fight was short, but chaotic. Turner managed to subdue one of the men while Caleb disarmed another. The third slipped out the side door, disappearing into the rain. When the lights finally came back on, the man in the hoodie was gone. Only the hum of the computers remained. Turner cursed under his breath. He planned this. Caleb quickly checked the terminal. The files were still open, but the data was corrupt, overwritten in seconds. He wiped everything again. But then he noticed something, a small encrypted message left behind, hidden in the code. He copied it to his drive. Turner leaned over his shoulder. What's it say? Caleb decoded the text slowly. It says, you're chasing the wrong person. Check your own. The words sent a chill through the room. Turner stared at him. What does that mean? Caleb's mind raced. It could mean there's someone inside. Someone feeding them our moves. That would explain how they knew we were coming, how they set the trap. Turner ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. So we've got a mole. Looks that way, Caleb said quietly. And whoever it is, they're close enough to know our schedule. They left the building with more questions than answers. The drive back to headquarters was silent. Caleb stared out the window, thinking about the message. It wasn't the words themselves, and it was the tone. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. When they arrived, Turner headed straight to the director's office to report. Caleb went to the analysis room, trying to recover what fragments he could from the wiped data. After hours of work, he found one tiny trace, a timestamp embedded deep within the erased logs. It matched the exact minute Turner had called for clearance that morning. Caleb froze. That meant whoever leaked their movements had access to the same network Turner used. He didn't want to believe it. Turner had been the only one who trusted him after everything. But the numbers didn't lie. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen. When Turner returned, Caleb forced himself to stay calm. Turner looked tired, almost defeated. The director wants results. He thinks we're spinning our wheels. Caleb hesitated. Did anyone else know about the operation? Just us in command, Turner replied. Why? Caleb met his eyes. Because someone's been listening. Every move we've made, every location, they knew it before we got there. Turner's expression changed. You think someone inside the bureau's feeding them? I don't think, Caleb said quietly. I know. Turner didn't answer right away. He just stared at the wall, his jaw tightening. You're suggesting a serious accusation. I'm suggesting we're being used, Caleb said firmly. And unless we figure out who it is, everything we're doing is a waste. The tension between them hung heavy in the room. Turner finally nodded. All right, you dig. But keep it quiet. No one outside this room hears about it. That night, Caleb stayed up going through every communication log from the past week. It was slow, exhausting work, but by dawn, he found something buried deep in the archives. A hidden data packet sent from the internal network to an external location right before their Richmond operation. It was disguised as a maintenance ping. But the content revealed classified coordinates, their exact route and timing. He traced the signature. His stomach dropped. It was sent from Turner's account. Caleb sat there for what felt like forever. The man who had believed in him, who had stood up for him after the arrest, the only one who hadn't treated him like a suspect, was now the person who might be betraying them all. He didn't want to accept it. There had to be another explanation, a forged credential, a system hack. He told himself that again and again. But the digital trail was clean. Too clean. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Later that morning, Turner walked into the room holding 2 coffees. You've been up all night, he said casually. Caleb forced a small smile. Yeah, almost done. Turner handed him a cup. You look like you've seen a ghost. Caleb stared at the cup for a moment, then met Turner's eyes. I found something. A transmission sent before we reached the hub. Turner frowned. From who? Caleb hesitated, watching his reaction carefully. From your account. The room went silent. Turner didn't move, but something changed in his face. Just a flicker, but enough. Finally, he spoke quietly. You're sure? I triple-checked, Caleb said. If you didn't send it, someone used your credentials. Turner sat down slowly, his tone measured. Then someone's setting me up. Caleb searched his expression. You expect me to believe that? Turner met his gaze. I expect you to trust me. The same way I trusted you when everyone else didn't. The words hit hard. Caleb looked away, torn between logic and loyalty. Then we need to find proof, he said finally. Turner nodded. We will, but you and we keep this between us. If there's a mole, they'll panic once they know we're onto them. Caleb agreed, though unease still lingered in his chest. As Turner left the room, he couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in his demeanor, the calm, the control. Later that night, as Caleb was reviewing the files again, his screen flickered. A new message appeared, sent from an unknown source. It read, "He's not who you think he is." Caleb's heart raced. Before he could trace it, the message vanished. He sat there in the glow of the monitor, realizing he was standing on the edge of something much bigger, a conspiracy that reached into the very agency meant to protect people. And the worst part was, he didn't know who to trust anymore. Was only a few blocks away, so he slowed his pace, his eyes scanning the corners just as he had been trained. He looked calm on the outside, but his heart beat fast. He stopped for a moment near an intersection. The street was empty, except for a parked police car at the corner. He paid little attention to it at first. He had done nothing wrong. He adjusted his backpack and started to cross. Inside the police car, 2 officers were on patrol. They had been driving around for hours, their shift nearly over, but both were restless. When they saw Caleb standing on the corner, one of them frowned. Hey, what's that guy doing out here this late? The older officer asked. Not sure, the younger one replied, glancing up from his coffee. Looks suspicious, though. Been standing there for a while. He's got a backpack. Could be carrying something, the older officer said, narrowing his eyes. They watched Caleb for a few seconds, then pulled over. When Agent Turner walked into the police station that morning, the room fell silent. His badge glinted under the bright lights as he strode to the front desk, his expression sharp and unreadable. Behind him were 2 other federal agents, their presence enough to make everyone shift nervously in their seats. The desk officer, still holding his coffee, looked up in surprise. Can I help you, sir? Turner didn't waste a second. I'm here for a man you arrested last night. His name is Caleb. The officer blinked, confused. Caleb, we did pick someone up last night, yes. Suspicious behavior, refusing to cooperate. Refusing to cooperate? Turner's voice cut through the air like a blade. You detained a federal operative working on an active mission. Because of your mistake, an entire FBI operation failed. Do you have any idea what that means? The officer's face turned pale. He quickly reached for the phone, mumbling. 1 moment, sir. Now, Turner ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Within minutes, the older arresting officer appeared from the hallway, clearly startled by the sight of 3 federal agents standing in his station. What's this about? He asked, trying to sound in control. Turner took a step closer. You arrested a man named Caleb last night. Where is he? The officer crossed his arms. We picked up someone by that name, yeah. Looked suspicious, carrying a drive he refused to explain. We had reason to— You had no reason, Turner interrupted firmly. You stopped him without cause, detained him without charges, and seized federal property. The officer frowned. We were just doing our job. If he'd told us who he was, he couldn't tell you, Turner said, his voice steady but full of controlled anger. He was under a classified directive, and now because you decided to play detective, the data he was carrying didn't reach us in time. A cyber attack hit our systems at 1:40 a.m. Do you understand the level of damage that caused? The officer looked down, the weight of his mistake slowly sinking in. I didn't know, he muttered. No, Turner replied. You didn't care to know. He turned to one of his colleagues. Get him out. Moments later, Caleb was led from the holding room. His wrists were red from the cuffs, his eyes tired and distant. When he saw Turner, there was both relief and frustration in his face. "Sir," he said quietly. "I tried to explain." "I know," Turner replied softly, putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll handle it from here." Caleb nodded, but his voice trembled slightly. "The drive? Did they?" Turner glanced toward the evidence room. "We'll get it back. Just stay calm." The officers at the desk exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. The atmosphere was thick with guilt and confusion. Turner followed one of the station supervisors to retrieve the evidence. When they brought back the silver data drive, Turner's jaw tightened. He turned to the officers who had made the arrest. "Do you even understand what this little piece of metal could have done? It could have stopped millions of people from losing their private information. Government systems are in chaos right now. Hospitals, airports, even defense networks were temporarily shut down. All because someone thought it was okay to judge before asking." The room was silent. The older officer finally whispered, "We thought he was lying. People lie about that stuff all the time." "And yet," Turner replied, "you didn't even check before arresting him. You didn't call it in. You didn't run a name check. You just saw what you wanted to see." His words hung heavy in the air. Caleb stood quietly beside him, watching the officers avoid his gaze. He wanted to be angry, but mostly he just felt drained. There was no satisfaction in seeing them regret it. The damage had already been done. Turner took Caleb outside to the car. The early morning sun had risen high, but the streets still felt quiet. Almost too quiet. As they drove toward the field office, Turner glanced at him. "You handled yourself well," he said finally. Caleb gave a tired half-smile. "Did I? I spent the night in a cell while everything fell apart." Turner nodded slowly. "You did what you could." "They didn't." There was a long pause. Caleb looked out the window. "How bad is it?" Turner hesitated. "Worse than we expected. The attackers breached our secondary firewall. They got access to communications data from several agencies. It'll take weeks to repair everything." Caleb sighed, his shoulders heavy. "And all that because of one misunderstanding." Turner didn't respond. The truth was painful enough without saying it aloud. When they reached the field office, the atmosphere inside was tense. Agents rushed between desks, phones ringing nonstop, reports being printed one after another. The entire building felt like it was under pressure. Caleb followed Turner to a private room. On the table were several folders and maps pinned to the wall. Turner closed the door behind them and leaned against it for a moment. "You were supposed to meet Agent Price at the cafe," Turner said. "He waited for over an hour. By the time we realized something was wrong, the breach had already started." Caleb nodded. "I didn't think it would go that far. I thought if I explained to them, they didn't listen." Turner finished for him. Caleb rubbed his temples. "I kept thinking if I just stayed calm it would work out. But every time I tried to explain, it made them more suspicious. That's what happens when people act on bias," Turner said quietly. They stopped hearing what's being said. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the hum of computers and muffled conversations outside. Then Turner said, "We're not done. We still have to find who was behind the attack. We have a lead, but we'll need you again. You're the only one who understands the code structure from that drive." Caleb straightened up, nodding. "I'll do whatever it takes." Turner gave a small, approving smile. That's what I needed to hear. They spent the next few hours analyzing what was left of the encrypted data. Some parts were damaged beyond recovery, but enough remained to trace the breach to an offshore network. It wasn't much, but it was something. By late afternoon, Caleb Lee, the morning sun, slipped through the blinds of the safe house, landing across Caleb's face as he opened his eyes. For a few seconds, he didn't move. The air was quiet still. He could almost pretend the last 48 hours hadn't happened. The arrest, the mission failure, the embarrassment. But the weight of it came rushing back like a storm. He sat up slowly, his mind already running through the events again. Turner had promised they'd find whoever was behind the cyber attack. But Caleb knew it wouldn't be easy. Whoever pulled it off had inside knowledge. They'd known exactly what data to target. That meant there was a leak somewhere, and leaks didn't happen by accident. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. Turner stepped in, holding 2 files. He looked as serious as ever. "Morning," he said simply. Caleb nodded. "Morning." Turner handed him one of the folders. "We spent the night tracing the breach. Found something interesting." Caleb opened it, scanning the papers. There were screenshots, network maps, and lines of access logs. "This IP," he said slowly. "It's domestic. Not overseas," Turner nodded. "Exactly. The signal bounced around to make it look foreign, but it started right here. A government contractor's office in Virginia." Caleb frowned. "You're saying one of ours?" "I'm saying someone who used to be one of ours," Turner replied. "They had the kind of clearance you don't lose overnight." Caleb leaned back, rubbing his chin. "That explains the code structure." It felt familiar. Whoever it is, they worked on internal systems. "Which means they knew the weak spots," Turner said. "And they used them." The two sat in silence for a moment, both processing the same thought. Then Turner added, "We need to go there quietly. I've already arranged clearance. But we can't afford another mistake." Caleb nodded, closing the folder. "Then let's move." By noon, they were on the road in an unmarked black SUV. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and the sound of tires on asphalt filled the car. Turner kept his eyes on the road while Caleb stared out the window, lost in thought. He couldn't stop thinking about the night he got arrested. The flashing lights, the disbelief in the officers' faces, the way no one believed a word he said. Now knowing what had been lost because of it, the sting was sharper. He told himself he had to stay focused. The mission wasn't over. It had just changed. When they reached the contractor's office, it looked ordinary, a beige building with tinted windows and a small parking lot. Nothing about it screamed classified work. But inside, the story was different. A security guard met them at the entrance. Turner showed his credentials, and they were led into a back room where rows of old servers still hummed faintly. "This place was shut down 6 months ago," the guard explained. "Budget cuts. Most of the team transferred out." Turner gave a polite nod. "We just need to take a quick look." Once they were alone, Caleb got to work. He connected a portable drive to one of the terminals, typing rapidly. Lines of code scrolled down the screen as he navigated old files. Turner watched quietly, scanning the room for anything out of place. "Find anything?" "Give me a second," Caleb murmured, eyes locked on the screen. Then something appeared, a hidden folder buried deep within the archived data. He opened it and his pulse quickened. "There it is," he said. "Encrypted communication logs. Someone used this system to relay messages after the shutdown." Turner came closer. "Can you tell who?" "Not yet. But whoever did this left traces. They weren't expecting anyone to check these servers again." It took another half hour, but finally Caleb cracked the encryption. The messages appeared, short bursts of coded text, each with a timestamp. Turner leaned in. "What's that line mean?" Caleb translated softly. "Phase 2 in motion. Delay successful. Continue with asset relocation." He looked up. They knew about the mission. The delay, that was me getting arrested. Turner's expression hardened. "So they planned for it?" "Yes," Caleb said, scrolling through more entries. "And they were monitoring our field operations. Look at this. They even mentioned the exact time our data transfer was scheduled." Turner exhaled slowly. "That means they had someone feeding them information from inside." Caleb nodded grimly. "Someone high up. They copied everything to the drive and left the building quietly." Back in the car, Turner was already on the phone, arranging for a secure analysis team. Caleb sat silently, staring at the drive in his hands. He couldn't shake the thought that the mistake at the police station hadn't just been bad timing. Maybe it had been convenient, too convenient. What if the attackers had somehow orchestrated it, knowing it would delay him? That evening, back at the Bureau's field office, Turner gathered a small team in a closed room. On the large monitor, Caleb projected the decoded messages. The agents listened carefully as he explained what he'd found. "It's clear they had help," he said. "They used an old government channel, one only available to former contractors. Whoever did this had clearance access that wasn't properly revoked." One of the agents asked, "Do we have a name?" Caleb hesitated. "Not yet. But based on the code signature, it looks like someone who used to work on cyber defense projects. They signed their files with the alias Echo." Turner's eyes narrowed. "I remember that code name. They were one of our best, until they vanished 3 years ago after a classified project was terminated." Another agent said quietly, "So they turned rogue." Caleb nodded. "Looks like it. And if that's true, they're not working alone. They've built a network. This wasn't just sabotage. It was coordinated." The room fell silent. Everyone could feel the weight of what that meant. Turner finally spoke. "We'll find them. But first we need to make sure this doesn't leak again." He turned to Caleb. "You've already been targeted once. You might be on their radar." Caleb gave a tired smile. Wouldn't be the first time. That night, Caleb was relocated again, this time to a more secure facility. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept replaying everything. The arrest, the mission, the data, the new lead. Somewhere out there, the person behind all this was still moving freely, confident no one could catch them. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about how close they had come to losing everything. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about trust. Trust broken within the system, and the damage it could cause when people stopped looking past their own assumptions. The next morning, Turner returned with more news. "We ran the server data through our systems. We found a location, a warehouse outside Richmond. It's active. Could be where they're operating from." Caleb sat up immediately. "Then that's where we go." Turner gave him a firm nod. "We're leaving in an hour." The drive to Richmond was tense. The air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. Turner drove with steady focus while Caleb reviewed the files again, memorizing every possible clue. When they reached the warehouse, it looked abandoned. Rusted doors, broken windows, nothing but silence around it. But Caleb's instincts told him otherwise. They parked a distance away and moved in carefully. Turner signaled to 2 agents to circle around the back while he and Caleb approached the front. The lock on the door was new, too new for an old building. Turner gave a slight nod. "Ready?" Caleb took a breath. "Ready." They stepped inside quietly. The interior was dim, lit only by the faint glow of computer screens. Dozens of them, all running lines of code. Someone had been here recently. Caleb approached one of the terminals and started checking logs. "They've been rerouting traffic through dummy servers," he whispered. "Whoever's behind this is close and maybe still monitoring." Suddenly, one of the screens flickered. A message appeared in large letters. "You're late." Caleb froze. Turner's hand instinctively went to his holster, scanning the shadows. They knew we'd come. The message changed again. "You shouldn't have looked." Then every screen went dark. The hum of the computers stopped, leaving only silence. Caleb backed away slowly, his heart pounding. "They wiped the system remotely," Turner nodded. "And now they know we're after them." As they left the warehouse, Turner looked at him. "We just walked into their trap. But at least now we know one thing. They're watching us as closely as we're watching them." Caleb looked back at the dark building. "Then it's a race," he said quietly. "And I don't plan on losing." When they got back into the car, Turner checked his phone. There was already a new message from headquarters. The data they'd collected had triggered a hidden trace. The system had picked up a new signal, one that might finally reveal where Echo was hiding. Caleb glanced at Turner, determination in his eyes. "Let's finish this," Turner nodded. "We will. One step at a time." As they drove off into the fading light, Caleb couldn't help but think how strange it was. How one misunderstanding at a police stop had spiraled into something this big. What started as a moment of injustice had turned into a national threat. But now he had a chance to make it right, and for the first time in days he felt a quiet spark of hope. Ned back in his chair, exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot from staring at lines of code. Turner came over with 2 cups of coffee. "You've been through a lot in 24 hours, he said. Caleb took the cup gratefully. "Feels like a lifetime," Turner nodded. "I'm filing a formal complaint against the precinct. This kind of behavior can't go unchecked." "You deserve an apology," Caleb shook his head. "I don't want an apology. I just want this mission fixed." Turner studied him for a moment. "You're a good man, Caleb. You focus on what matters." Caleb gave a small smile. "That's what the job's about, right?" The two worked in silence for a while longer until Turner's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression turning serious. "What is it?" Caleb asked. Turner looked up slowly. "We might have found something. A connection between the hackers and a private contractor who used to work for the government." Caleb frowned. "You mean someone inside?" Turner nodded. "Or someone who used to be. Either way, they had access. And they're covering their tracks fast." Caleb leaned forward. "Then we can still stop them." "Maybe," Turner said. "But we'll need to move carefully. One mistake and they'll vanish again." As evening settled, Turner arranged for Caleb to rest at a secure facility. The Bureau wanted to keep him safe, not only because of what he knew, but also because of what he represented. The story of his arrest had already begun to circulate quietly among agents. It had become an uncomfortable reminder of how easily good work could be undone by prejudice and poor judgment. That night, Caleb sat alone in a quiet room, staring out the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance. He thought about everything that had happened: the flashing lights, the cold cell, the disbelief in the officer's eyes. He also thought about the look on Turner's face when he said the mission had failed. It wasn't anger, and it was disappointment, not just in the mistake, but in the system that allowed it to happen. Caleb didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired, but deep down there was something else growing inside him, a quiet determination. He wasn't going to let this end with failure. He wasn't going to let a moment of ignorance define everything he had worked for. Somewhere out there, the people behind the cyber attack were celebrating. They thought they had won, but they didn't know that the man they almost destroyed was still standing, ready to fight back. As he watched the lights fade in the distance, Caleb whispered softly to himself, "You stopped me once, but not again." Outside, in another part of town, the two police officers from the night before sat in their cruiser, the same uneasy silence hanging between them. Neither spoke, but both were thinking about the same thing: the look in Turner's eyes that morning, the words he said, and the realization that one reckless decision had changed everything. Caleb noticed the flashing lights before he heard the siren. He froze. His first instinct was to stay calm, to remember the Bureau's advice: cooperate, be respectful, and don't escalate. Still, his pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the plan. The two officers stepped out of the car and approached him. "Evening," one said sharply. "What are you doing out here this late?" Caleb nodded politely. "Just heading to a meeting, sir." "A meeting?" the officer repeated with a skeptical tone. "At this hour?" "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. "It's work-related." The officer's eyes shifted to the backpack. "What's in the bag?" Caleb hesitated for just a second, not because he had anything illegal, but because he knew what was inside: the encrypted drive. He couldn't just hand it over or explain everything. "It was classified, just some work files," he said carefully. "Mind if we take a look?" the officer asked, already reaching forward. "Actually, sir," Caleb began, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not allowed to share the contents. It's confidential work property. If you'd just allow me to—" That was enough for the officer to frown deeply. He looked at his partner. "Confidential, huh? You think he's hiding something?" The second officer shrugged. "Looks nervous to me." Caleb took a deep breath. "I'm not hiding anything. Please, if you just contact—" "Hands where I can see them," the officer interrupted sharply. The tension built in seconds. Caleb slowly raised his hands, trying to keep his tone steady. "I understand, sir. I'm not resisting." "But you're making a mistake." The officers didn't seem interested in listening. One of them took the bag, unzipped it, and found the small silver drive in a protective case. He held it up, squinting. "What's this?" Caleb swallowed hard. "It's a data drive. It's for a federal—" "A what?" the officer snapped. "You expect us to believe that?" "I'm telling the truth," Caleb said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm working with—" "Enough!" the older officer interrupted, cutting him off. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Caleb froze. This wasn't happening. "Not tonight. Not like this. Sir, please," he said. "You can call your superior or check with—" "Don't tell me how to do my job," the officer barked. In less than a minute, Caleb was handcuffed and placed in the back of the police car. He stared out the window as they drove away, disbelief and fear mixing in his chest. He knew every second lost meant the FBI was one step closer to failure. At the cafe, two federal agents sat at a corner table, glancing at their watches. One of them muttered, "He should have been here by now." The other nodded grimly. Maybe he got delayed. They waited another 15 minutes. Then 30. Finally, the older agent stood. "We can't wait any longer. If we don't get that drive, the breach will go through." Back at the precinct, Caleb sat in a small holding room. He had tried explaining again, calmly, carefully, but the officers wouldn't hear it. To them, he was just another suspicious person refusing to cooperate. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The lights buzzed above him, cold and unwelcoming. He thought about the mission, about how much depended on that small drive sitting in an evidence locker now. At 1:30 a.m., the FBI office miles away received an alert. Unauthorized access was detected in a government database. Within minutes, entire networks began to shut down. By morning, sensitive information from multiple departments had been exposed. The mission had failed completely, and all the while, the man who could have stopped it was sitting in a cell, waiting for someone to believe him. When dawn broke, one of the officers entered the room, holding a cup of coffee. He looked tired, maybe even slightly uneasy. "So," he said, leaning against the wall, "you still sticking to that story?" Caleb looked up slowly. "It's not a story. Call the FBI field office in Bay Ridge. Ask for Agent Turner. He'll verify everything." The officer hesitated. "You really think I'm going to call the FBI because some guy tells me he's part of a mission?" "Yes," Caleb said quietly. "Because if you don't, something bad has already happened." The officer looked at him for a moment longer, then sighed and left the room. Caleb could only hope he'd make the call. Outside, the sun began to rise over the coast, casting a warm glow over the quiet town, a town that had no idea what had just unfolded overnight. Meanwhile, at the FBI office, chaos had broken out. Agents were running reports trying to trace how their operation had collapsed. When Agent Turner finally received a message from local police stating that a man named Caleb had been arrested for suspicious activity, his face went pale. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. He grabbed his coat and stormed. Out back at the precinct, Caleb sat in silence, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He thought about the people who would suffer because of what happened, about how quickly a misunderstanding had spiraled into disaster. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly he was tired. Tired of not being heard, tired of assumptions, tired of being treated like he didn't belong. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "They'll find out the truth," but deep down, he knew the truth would come too late. That morning, as the first headlines began to appear about a nationwide cyber breach, the two officers who had arrested Caleb sat in the break room, watching the news in silence. The anchor's voice filled the room. "Officials say the failure of last night's security operation allowed hackers to access critical data. The FBI has not released further details." One officer looked at the other, uneasy. "You don't think?" The older officer shook his head. "No, couldn't be." But the doubt was already there. Minutes later, the door burst open. Agent Turner entered with two other federal officers, flashing his badge. His voice was cold and furious. "Where is he?" That was the moment everything started to unravel.